Hey guys, tonight we're walking along the edge of a crumbling pier knot, your modern concrete eyesore. The one laid down by Roman hands over 2,000 years ago. The waves lap against it with the same rhythm they've held since before Caesar wore sandals. And yet, somehow these blocks haven't collapsed. You look down and realize this thing has survived more empires than UVA had phone upgrades. Which, frankly, is a little insulting. You crouch, running your fingers along the surface. It's rough and stubborn, with barnacles clinging like loyal fans. You knock on it gently. It sounds solid, like it's still working a full-time job, which it is holding up history. The air smells like sea salt, and maybe just a hint of Roman arrogance. This is the sort of place that's not just old at S, ancient and proud of it. You squint out at the sea. Storms have hammered this coast. Earthquakes have rattled it. Tourists have probably spilled soda on it. But still, this pier refuses to fall. You glance at the nearby modern breakwater built in the 1980s, repaired in the 1990s, forgotten by the 2000s. That one, cracked like a sugar cookie. This Roman one, it could host a dinner party. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing our little sleepy community light up across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly toward the edge of the pier, hearing each creak of the ancient stones beneath your steps. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember your neighbor complaining that their driveway had to be redone after 3 years. You try not to laugh. The wind shifts, and for a moment you feel transported, not in the sci-fi time machine way. More like the world around you quietly realigns itself, and suddenly, you're standing in the same spot, but to millennia earlier. A Roman engineer shouts something nearby, probably about angles and foundations, in which apprentice forgot the trowel again. You glance to your right. There's scaffolding built from olive wood. A few workers, draped in linen tunics, are muscling enormous slabs into place. One of them is humming. The pier is half built, but already it feels eternal. You get the sense this isn't just architecture. It's legacy, calcified into form. A Roman engineer strides past you, carrying what looks like a basket of weight. Is that just volcanic ash? You follow him, he's muttering under his breath, probably about inconsistent pozzolana quality, and you catch the word pulvis, Latin for dust. You peek into his basket, and yep, it's definitely dust. Gray, clumpy, a little sulfuric. Here's your first historical tidbit for the night. This humble ash, when combined with lime and seawater, becomes the secret ingredient in a formula that's now baffling modern engineers. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly understood the long-term chemistry or just got lucky. Either way, it worked. You kneel beside a shallow pit filled with the blend. It looks unremarkable, a little sludgy. It's kind of like oatmeal made by someone who hates joy. Yet this mess, when set into molds and kissed by seawater, will turn into structures that last centuries longer than anything we've abhorred in the last 100 years. Nearby, a young apprentice drops a handful of pebbles into a wooden frame. Another pours the lime dash slurry on top. You're witnessing concrete being born, not the Portland cement, but the real OG stuff. Suddenly a cart rolls by, carrying a sign, Opus Cementitium, the Roman word for concrete. It literally means the work of small stones. You smile. Somehow even their names had gravitas. You get distracted by a seagull, who looks just as judgmental now as he did in the future. He squawks and flies off toward the half-finished port, which juts into the sea like a challenge. Come at me, Poseidon. A gentle drizzle begins to fall. You half expect it to wash away the scene like a dream, but it doesn't. Instead, you watch as the moisture meets the freshly poured surface. It hisses quietly. The mix begins to set. Not instantly. Not perfectly. But in a way that tells you this isn't the end of the process. It's just the beginning of a slow, strengthening transformation. Fast forward in your mind. Not by decades, but by centuries. Picture that same pure, enduring wave after wave. The chemical reactions deep inside it, still evolving, hardening, resisting, while everything around it changes from sandals to sneakers to steel-toed boots. This pier stays. And here's the oddest fringe detail. Recent studies show that Roman concrete, unlike ours, actually improves with time when exposed to seawater. Scientists poking around ancient docks found rare crystals forming inside the mixed crystals that fill in cracks, like the stone is healing itself. No epoxy needed, no repair crew, just water, ash, and time. Back in your timeline, you shake your head. The modern world prides itself on innovation, and yet you are marveling at ancient dust that aged better than most people's knees. The drizzle fades, replaced by that soft, steady hush of ocean breeze. You sit on a stone, slightly damp but warm from the day's sun. You can still feel the solidity beneath you. Still hear the occasional creak from the harbor's woodwork. Still taste the salt in the air. And as your eyes begin to close, you let the weight of that history settle into your bones. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't boast, just lasts. You're still sitting on that Roman stone, sun-warmed, salt-kissed, and just a little smug about its own durability. You brushed your hand along the edge again, this time more deliberately. Yes. As if trying to read the recipe locked inside its centuries-old pores. Because let's face it, whatever this is made of, it works better than any bag of concrete you've picked up at the hardware store. You imagine trying to recreate this stuff in your garage? You'd need volcanic ash, seawater, lime, and according to some theories, a suspicious amount of patience. Your neighbors would think you've lost it. Don't mind him, they'd whisper. He's just reviving Roman engineering in his driveway. But the Romans didn't think it was eccentric. To them, it was essential. This wasn't just a building material. It was a ticket to empire. So you take a stroll through time. Not far from that sturdy harbor is a construction site on the Palatine Hill. You hear the metallic ring of chisels on stone and the soft slosh of mixing troughs. You step over a pile of rubble and peer into a large wooden formwork half filled with a paste the consistency of bread dough. It smells chalkier. A mix of wet limestone and scorched earth. You're watching the Romans make their signature blend. Not dry, not soupy. It's somewhere in between. Goldilocks concrete. And here's the trick. Unlike modern cement, which relies on high-temperature kilns and a carbon footprint the size of a small empire, Roman concrete was low-tech, but high wisdom. It used what nature provided: volcanic ash from nearby mountains, lime baked in small furnaces, and seawater hauled in by the bucket. Modern scientists have tried to reverse engineer this recipe. The results, let's just say, inconsistent. One group at MIT swears by the precise mineral composition. Another says it's all about the curing process. And some Italian archaeologists argue it was all done by feel like grandma's secret pasta sauce. Historians still argue whether the Romans had an exact formula or just a really good eye and excellent instincts. You run your hand through a nearby pile of dry ash. It's soft and gray, like powdered history. This is Pazzolana, named after the town of Pezzawale near Naples, where the best volcanic ash was harvested. It was so valuable that the Romans exported it across the empire in giant amphorae, like some dusty vintage wine. You picture some merchant in Gaul, opening a shipment and exclaiming, "Ah, yes, a fine batch of Neapolitan silt." The pozzolana was mixed with slaked lime calcium hydroxide and combined with water to create a paste. This was their cement. And when they tossed in bits of rock, tile, or rubble concrete. But not just any concrete. This stuff was resilient, flexible, even artistic. You paused to admire a half-finished aqueduct arch nearby. The framework is wood, but the infill is this odd solidified mix that looks like stone, but feels lighter. Tap it. It rings a bit, alive almost. Like it's still doing chemical math in its sleep. A worker walks past with a handful of brick fragments. Instead of discarding them, he tosses them into the mix. Waste not, want not. Roman concrete wasn't just strong, it was sustainable. Recycled materials were the norm, not the exception. You kind of feel like it deserves a TED Talk. Off to the side, two engineers are having a heated discussion. You pick up phrases, opus, cementitium, calx viva, aqua marina. You smile, even in Latin, concrete nerds are concrete nerds. One of them gestures at the nearby bay. It must touch the sea, he insists. That's what makes it eternal. No, it's the ash. Without the ash, it's just soggy limestone. This might be your favorite detail of the night. Roman concrete docenti just survive contact with seawater, it thrives on it. Over time, exposure to saltwater triggers complex chemical reactions that form new minerals inside the concrete. Altobermorite, for example, a rare crystal that's basically nature's glue gun. It seals cracks from the inside out. That's right, this ancient material is self-healing. You blink slowly, trying to wrap your head around the idea. A wall that heals itself. A dock that grows stronger when splashed by waves. Your kitchen counter can't even handle lemon juice without stains. You lean over the mixing pit and let the scent wash over you. Earthy, smoky, like summer rain on hot stone. It's oddly calming. Imagine being one of the laborers here, hauling buckets of seawater, kneading the mix like dough, laughing with your crew, while building something you knew would outlive you. A fringe theory floats into your mind, one proposed by a German scholar in the 19th century. He believed the concrete's longevity had less to do with ingredients and more to do with Roman rituals. The spirit of the lime must be honored, he wrote, apparently with a straight face. And while that sounds like something from a fantasy novel, you can't help but wonder. Maybe it wasn't just chemistry. Maybe belief mattered, too. After all, when you build with reverence, when you craft something not just to function but to endure docenti, it changed the outcome. The sun dips lower in the sky. Shadows stretch across the site. Somewhere, someone's dog is barking, probably at a goat, maybe at a senator. You don't ask questions. You wander back. Toward the sea, letting the breeze wrap around you like a cloak. The harbor is quiet now. The workers have packed up. The stone forms still sit, cooling in place, ready to harden for centuries to come. And you pause at the edge of the pier once more. Run your fingers across the top. The same stones, the same mix, but now you understand it better. Not just what it's made of, but how it's made. Why it's lasted. And why even now we're still trying to catch up. You're still standing at the edge of the pier, fingertips tingling with ancient grit, when a peculiar scent drifts in from the south, a mix of sulfur and smoke. It hits your nose like burnt toast laced with fireworks. You wrinkle your brow, turn inland, and follow the strange aroma. It leads you to the heart of it all. Vesuvius. Yes, that Vesuvius. You know, the one that famously turned Pompeii into a very unfortunate diorama? But tonight, you're not here for the ash-covered statues or tragic frozen poses. You're here for the ash itself. You climb slowly, winding up the blackened side of the mountain. Volcanic rock crunches beneath your sandals. You're wearing sandals now. Because why not? You've committed. The air is dry, but not dead. There's life in it, warm and ancient. You feel the heat of the earth, like a heartbeat underfoot. At the summit, the view stretches endlessly. To the west, the Bay of Naples glimmers in twilight. To the east, hills roll softly towards sleepy villas and stone aqueducts, and beneath your feet, the source of Roman magic, pozzolanic ash. You scoop some into your palm. It's dusty and fine, the same dull gray that filled the mixing pits by the harbor. It's not glamorous, it's not shiny, but this is the key. And it came from catastrophe. Here's your historical tidbit of the evening. After the eruption in 79 CE, Roman builders found that ash from Vesuvius, especially the fluffy stuff layered with volcanic glass and minerals, created concrete that hardened not just once, but over time. It was the ash's secret blend of silicates and illuminates that, when mixed with lime and water, triggered reactions were still decoding. You blow gently on the ash, and it dances away like ancient breath. Somewhere, a Roman priest probably said a quick prayer before scooping this same dust into his mortar. And here's the strange part. Not all ash is equal. Historians still argue whether only certain layers of pozzolana worked best, and if Roman engineers had an instinct for sorting them. Some claim they tested each batch with a vinegar trick. Others think they just went by smell. That last one's probably a stretch, but honestly, after spending time with these builders, it wouldn't surprise you. You descend the volcano slowly, your pouch now filled with precious gray powder. Down below, a quiet village buzzes softly with lamps and conversation. You pass a group of builders finishing their dinner. One of them points at your pouch and chuckles. "You gonna build Rome with that?" He jokes in Latin. You smile and keep walking. Near the bottom of the slope, you spot another mixing station. Only this one's a little different. Instead of seawater, they're using mountain spring water. And instead of large aggregate, they're tossing in pottery shards, broken amphorae, old roof tiles, even bits of mosaic. It's recycling again, but with flair. You crouch beside the vat. Yes, it bubbles faintly. The mix is still thick, but less gritty than what you saw at the harbor. It dawns on you this is land concrete. The Romans used two variations of their mix. One for underwater structures that needed seawater to cure properly, and another for land-based buildings like temples, roads, and arenas. And the land version was more flexible, more forgiving. Like a bread recipe you could tweak depending on humidity. Some regions had ash that was heavy with iron. Others leaned more crystalline. The builders adjusted. No bag of standardized Romancrete here. Just intuition, trial, and a bit of divine patience. Another fringe fact. The ash from Campi Flegra, a supervolcano near Naples, may have been even better than Vesuvius ash. Some ancient sources hint at secret trade routes just for sourcing this perfect powder. One Roman poet even described it as the dust that endures. You make a mental note. That would be a great name for a band. As night falls, you find yourself back at the shore, watching as workers dump buckets of volcanic ash into a pit, mixing it with lime and crushed stone. Someone splashes in a ladle of seawater. The mix thickens, steams faintly, and is quickly shoveled into wooden molds. No hesitation, no overthinking, just confidence built on generations of muscle memory. And maybe that's what sets this process apart. It wasn't just the ingredients, it was the rhythm. Like baking bread passed from mother to daughter, this wasn't simply technical, it was cultural. You glance at a nearby warehouse, where neat rows of amphorae are stacked with chalk markings. Pozzolana, ABCU smirk. Ancient labeling systems, folks. Not quite barcodes, but close. A Roman supervisor walks by, scratching notes into a wax tablet. You peek over his shoulder, recording curing times, water ratios, and humidity levels. It's surprisingly methodical. You'd expect trial and error. But it's borderline scientific. You look down at your own hand. It's dusted in ash, lime, and sea spray. Wow. And you realize, tonight, you didn't just learn a material. You learned a mindset. One that valued endurance over efficiency, substance over speed. The breeze off the bay cools your face as you sit by the still-setting blocks. You run your fingers along a fresh edge. It's warm, not hot, not cold, but warm like it's becoming. And somewhere in the quiet between waves you hear it. It's the sound of time settling into place. It's the low hum of dust and water agreeing to stay together for 1,000 years or more. You wake well? Not quite wake, just shift slightly in the hush of early Roman dawn. The blocks from last night are now cool to the touch. They've set, cured gently overnight beneath linen tarps and the whispering wind. The scent of lime and earth still lingers like a campfire memory. You brush the ash from your sleeve and follow a procession of laborers heading into the city. The roads are paved in stones, some of it laid centuries ago, and still somehow smoother than your neighbor-esque driveway. You trail them into the bustling Roman Forum, where columns loom like gods frozen mid-conversation, and scaffolding hugs the side of yet another temple in progress. The city is alive with a constant hum of ambition, and everywhere you look, concrete, solid, gray, unpretentious. You're here for a recipe, not one you can eat, sadly, but something perhaps more elusive, a formula that built an empire and then vanished into time. You duck beneath a scaffolding beam and wander into a builder's workshop where stacks of scrolls are tied with frayed twine. An older man squints at a wall covered in scribbles, ratios, sketches, little notes in Latin shorthand. He grumbles about apprentices and missing records. You lean closer, trying to decipher it. And this is where things get interesting, because here, your mainstream historical fact. No single Roman recipe for concrete has survived in full. That's right, the empire that gave us roads, aqueducts, and architectural marvels didn't leave behind a handy Roman concrete for dummies guide. What we know comes from fragmented writings, surviving structures, and a lot of modern guesswork. The closest thing we have? A guy named Vitruvius. You squint at one of the scrolls and see his name written across the top. He was an architect in the 1st century BCE who wrote De Architectura. Basically, the Roman version of how to build things without angering the gods or your clients. He outlined proportions, materials, and even site selection, but his details are vague, poetic even. Not exactly helpful if you're trying to measure out the lime. Historians still argue whether Vitruvius was documenting common knowledge or simply his own preferences. Some scholars claim his book was more philosophical than practical, a kind of architectural TED Talk. Others insist it's full of real instructions, just buried under flowery language. One modern researcher described it as equal parts blueprint and bedtime story. Fitting, right? You glance at the scroll again. It's smudged. Some parts are illegible, but a few lines jump out. The best ash comes from the territories near Boia, mixed with lime. It's not too dry, nor too wet. You look up, mildly exasperated. That's it. That's the whole secret? Bake until golden brown and hope for the best? Even the builders seem unsure. You watch a team argue gently over proportions. One insists on more ash, the other favors thicker lime paste. They both seem convinced, and neither writes anything down. That's the thing about ancient recipes. They lived in the body, hands, eyes, instinct. Your grandmother probably never measured when she made soup either. In another corner of the workshop, a younger apprentice pours a batch of mix into a small wooden frame. But instead of reinforcing it with large stones, he presses in bits of broken pottery, each one carefully angled. You ask why, and he shrugs. For strength, and because the shards were lying around. Practical, poetic. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists have found bits of bone in Roman concrete. Not decorative, not symbolic, just there. Maybe trash, maybe structural. One theory suggests that calcium in the bone added something useful to the chemical reaction. Or maybe the dog just got too close to the work site. Historians are predictably still arguing about it. Outside, the sun is rising higher, and you follow the scent of fresh bread to a small stall near the baths. The baker hands you a loaf warm from the oven. For your trouble, he says, though you haven't really earned it, sit on the edge of a foundation block, one made of concrete so old it predates Julius Caesar, and tear off a piece of bread. The block beneath you is scored with tool marks and soot stains, but otherwise solid. You lean back, chewing, and stare up at the concrete dome of the nearby basilica. It curves overhead like a sky held still. It's not smooth. It's not glamorous. But it's still doing its job after all these centuries. And here's the real puzzle. Why don't we know more? How did a civilization capable of building the Pantheon forget how to mix a basic formula? Scholars believe that as the Western Roman Empire declined, so did technical knowledge. Workshops closed, trade routes collapsed, and with them, the rhythm of recipe sharing was interrupted. Oral traditions snapped. Scrolls were lost, burned, or used to wrap fish. By the Middle Ages, builders were hacking together mortars from local dirt and crushed brick, often without understanding what made Roman concrete so magical. One medieval text describes a method involving boiling lime in goat's milk, which, no, just no. You toss the last crumb of your bread to a nearby pigeon and watch it strut across the concrete. Still holding, still dependable. You pat the block beside you with affection. Maybe part of what made Roman concrete work was belief. Belief that you were building for generations, not just contracts. That materials deserved patience. That seawater wasn't the enemy, it was an ingredient. And maybe that belief, that relationship with time, is harder to recover than any recipe. A bell tolls somewhere. Not digital, not electric. It's just bronze and gravity. You rise slowly, brush the crumbs from your lap, and start walking. The forum fades behind you. Ahead, the aqueducts rise like great stone arms reaching across the countryside. You know what holds them together? Not steel, not wishful thinking, but something mixed by hand, poured with intent, and blessed by ash. You step off the road and run your fingers along the edge of an old milestone, half buried in grass. The inscription is worn, but you can still trace the grooves. It's dated not to a year, but to a reign, a time, a moment in Rome's pulse. And beneath your feet, concrete that remembers it all. You leave the forum behind like slipping out of a crowded dream, stepping into the quieter limbs of Rome, the edges where things are still built, but not yet carved in marble. You pass through a shaded alley, beneath drying linens strung between buildings, and emerge into a harbor town, stirring with life. Except here, life doesn't just bustle, it endures. And every path you walk leads to one thing: concrete. The streets hum with commerce. Fishmongers slap sea bass onto tables. Vendors call out prices for olives, figs, and that oddly chewy barley cake everyone pretends to love. You wander past warehouses and watch as dockworkers unload crates of marble, grain, and, yes, barrels filled with ash. You nod knowingly. Secret ingredient delivery. But as you look closer, something clicks. The entire port isn't just on Roman concrete. It is Roman concrete. The foundation, the columns, the retaining walls, even the benches where the older fishermen gathered to complain about nothing in particular. Every structure is a study in engineered simplicity, poured forms, sturdy bulk, edges that have softened with time but never given way. You stop near a temple, partially restored, partially original. The plaque claims its foundations date to the late Republic. That's over 2,000 years ago, and yet here it is, shrugging at earthquakes like they're passing moods. Or S. Your mainstream fact of the hour. Roman concrete was limited to a single region or style. It was used across provinces from Britain to Syria, from Gaul to North Africa. And in each region, the Romans adjusted their mix to the local materials, like chefs adapting recipes to whatever's in the pantry. You pass a villa wall inlaid with seashells, another with pebbles arranged into a mosaic of a dolphin chasing a squid. It's decorative, sure, but underneath the flair is concrete. Durable, stoic, like a bodyguard in a tuxedo. Then you turn a corner and stop short. A cistern, half-buried, moss-covered, and completely original. You peer inside and blink, still holding water. Let that sink in. A container made of lime and ash and rock has held water since the time of Augustus. You don't know how many modern water tanks can make that claim. Maybe none. You crouch beside it and dip your hand in. The water's cool and still. The stone around the rim is worn smooth, not by time, but by hands. Generations of them. People who fetched water, cleaned clothes, filled amphorae. The concrete bears the touch of all of them. You press your hand against the wall and feel not just dampness, but history soaked into the pores. Now for your quirky tidbit, the walls of some Roman baths were lined with waterproof concrete made from crushed pottery and tile. It was pinkish, almost pretty, and nicknamed Opus Signum. Pliny the Elder, that ancient encyclopedia of a man, even recommended it as the go-to for water resistance. He also believed that goat urine made a good polishing agent for marble, so maybe take his tips with a grain of salt. You walk further and notice another oddity, an ancient fish tank, part of a seaside villa. The walls are curved, and the concrete is dark gray, hardened from years of seawater and fish slime. Historians believe some wealthy Romans kept live fish in holding tanks picky eaters, even in antiquity. The concrete here isn't just enduring, it's adaptive. It holds in water, resists salt, supports arches, absorbs movement, no rebar, no sealants, just centuries of chemical harmony. You pause at a crumbled modern building nearby, enforced concrete exposed like bone through a wound. Built in the 1950s, abandoned, cracked. Compare that to the arch you just walked under, a Roman one that's still holding up a walkway without protest. It's like watching a centenarian do yoga while your 30-year-old coworker throws out his back sneezing. Historians still argue whether the Roman approach was more art or science. Did they know the pozzolana was reacting with seawater to create rare minerals like aluminous tobermorite? Or did they simply observe, repeat, and trust the results? It's the eternal debate between empirical brilliance and accidental genius, like inventing penicillin or toast. You cross a short bridge, also Roman, and notice how the concrete is streaked with salt deposits and lichen, but no cracks. It's solid, humble, built with intention, not ego. And maybe that's the real difference. Modern construction often feels rushed, measured in cost, not consequence. Designed for decades, not dynasties. Roman concrete, it wasn't cheap. It wasn't quick. But it was meant to last. You lean against a seawall and watch as waves lap gently against it. With each hit, the salt water creeps in and triggers another microscopic reaction. The concrete doesn't wear away. It gets stronger, like it's eating time. That's not just poetic, it's scientific. Modern researchers call it post-setting hydration, a process where minerals continue to form long after the mix is hardened. The Romans, intentionally or not, created a substance that evolves, like wine or a good story. And as the sun climbs higher, you feel the day warming around you. You trace a small crack along the wall. It's sealed over, barely visible. Probably healed itself. A living scar closing without help. You sit there for a while, silent with the waves in the stone, thinking about all the people who sat here before. Builders, merchants, fishermen, soldiers, all leaning on the same concrete. All gone now, but the mix remains. Maybe that's what legacy is. Not the grand gestures, but the quiet endurance. The things we build to outlast us. You close your eyes, lulled by the rhythmic hush of water and the heat of ancient stone against your back. You breathe in and the air tastes like salt, dust, and time. You wake not with a start, but the kind of gentle stirring that comes from resting against warm stone too long. Your back is molded to the seawall now, like you've become part of the structure. And frankly, it wouldn't be the worst fate. You stretch, yawn quietly, and begin to walk again. This time with a question bubbling in your mind. Why do my driveway lasts like this stuff? You chuckle at the comparison, but the truth is modern concrete isn't built the same, not even close. Your feet carry you inland now, away from the salt spray, and toward a bustling Roman roadway. Carts creak past, their wheels bumping rhythmically over stone pavers. You step onto a newly built causeway, its surface remarkably flat, and you notice it too is built on Roman concrete. You follow it for a while, tracing the backbone of the empire. It carries grain, gossip, and generals. And underneath, that same strange blend of ash, lime, water, and whatever else the Romans tossed in that day. But the real trick isn't just what S in the mix, it's what happens after. Step aside as a small crew repairs a roadside shrine. Their tools are simple: wooden frames, bronze trowels, and the occasional elbow. You watch them mix the concrete again, no fancy machines, no buzz of motors, just buckets, muscle, and time. A boy runs by carrying a water skin, sloshing it into the pit. The mixture fizzes faintly. The smell is familiar now, that warm, alkaline perfume of history in the making. Here's your historical fact. Modern concrete, what we call Portland cement, is made by heating limestone and clay at very high temperatures, releasing a great deal of carbon dioxide in the process. It hardens fast, which is convenient. But it also starts breaking down after just a few decades. Roman concrete, in contrast, strengthens over time, and it doesn't crack easily. In fact, some structures like seawalls near Puzawalia still gaining strength today. You watch as the crew finishes the patch, dusts off their hands, and moves on. The shrine looks good as new, which makes sense. The wall it's built on has been here since the late Republic. What's one more patch? And here's your quirky fringe fact. Some ancient Roman engineers deliberately didn't smooth the surface of their concrete walls. They believed the rough texture helped attract moss and plants, which in turn kept the walls cool, shade by photosynthesis. Low-tech, high concept. You stop at a fountain, a small one, dribbling spring water into a circular basin. Children run their fingers through the stream. Dog laps at the edge. The basin is made of, you guessed it, concrete, but not the usual gray. This one has flecks of pink and black in it, like a speckled cake. It's filled with a regional variety of pozzolana, local ash, local color. Roman engineers adapted their materials to whatever volcano, quarry, or riverbank was nearest. They weren't strict about aesthetics. They were strict about durability. You lean down and touch the edge of the fountain. It's warm in the sun, but smooth, worn not by erosion, but by centuries of use. The kind of wear that speaks not of failure, but of presence. Nearby, a group of older men sit on a low wall playing a dice game. One of them notices you studying the stones and calls out something in Latin. You smile, nod politely, and point to the ground. Still standing, you say, hoping your pronunciation isn't terrible? He laughs and thumps his heel on the stone. Of course it is, he says. It's Roman. Pride not just in empire or conquest, but in craftsmanship. That's something you start to understand as you walk on. This concrete wasn't just poured and left to dry. It was shaped, nurtured, poured with purpose. Modern structures often race the clock built in haste, dried in hours, forgotten in years. But Roman concrete, it was built for the ages. And now you come to your favorite comparison, the sidewalk back home. You remember the last time it rained? How the puddles gathered along cracks. How chunks had flaked off like old pastry. You sigh. The average lifespan of modern concrete infrastructure? 50 years if you're lucky. Less if your city skimps on the salt budget in winter. Historians still argue whether it's possible to match Roman concrete today. They have better tools. Yes. Microscopes. Mass spectrometers. Computational models. But despite decades of research, no modern formula has fully replicated what the Romans managed with ash and instinct. You pass another bridge, short, modest, still doing its job. You glance underneath, expecting to see cracks. There are none. It's tempting to believe the Romans were wizards, or had secret knowledge passed down from some toga-clad Merlin. But the truth is simpler. They respected materials, paid attention, and they built slowly. That's the part we keep forgetting. You sit on a low wall and close your eyes. The sun dapples your face through olive branches. Somewhere in the distance, a chisel taps stone. Clink, clink, pause, clink. The sound could be a metronome for civilization. A breeze carries the smell of olive oil and damp limestone. You take a deep breath, exhale slowly, and let your thoughts drift. Maybe endurance isn't about strength alone. Maybe it's about patience, precision, and the humility to build something not for your lifetime, but for someone else's. You reach down, pick up a pebble, and place it gently on the wall beside you. Not much, but enough. You smile, then rise, and walk on. You're walking again, this time through a quieter stretch of the countryside. The hills roll gently, dotted with vineyards and sheep, and the road beneath your feet is smooth. Not just paved, but engineered, laid over a base of compacted stone and, of course, that unassuming but mighty material, Roman concrete. It occurs to you that even in the middle of nowhere, the Romans left their fingerprints. Not just in cities or ports or palaces, but in the in-between places. Places meant for moving through, yet even here they built for the ages. You crouch and examine the road's edge, marveling at how it hasn't crumbled into gravel like your local asphalt. Instead, it's held its shape, thanks to layers. Beneath the paving stones is a thick concrete foundation, laid centuries ago and still intact. Here's your historical fact. Roman roads were often built with 4 to 5 layers. At the very bottom, a trench was dug and filled with sand or clay. Then came large stones packed tightly together. On top of that, a layer of Roman concrete. Above that, finer gravel, and finally paving stones. It wasn't just solid, it was smart. Designed to drain water and bear the weight of marching legions and squeaky wooden carts, You walk a few more steps and glance toward a low aqueduct stretching across the valley. It arches gracefully like a stony caterpillar, not showy, just there. You head toward it, your sandals kicking up dust, and you can't help but admire the elegance in its function. You reach the base of the structure and peer up at the joints where stone meets stone. But in between, there it is, again that signature gray filler. The Romans didn't carve every block to fit perfectly, used concrete to bridge the gaps, to bind the world together. And the genius of it, the concrete wasn't just filler. It became the structure. It hardened over time, anchoring the aqueduct in place like tree roots gripping the earth. Quirky tidbit time. Archaeologists recently discovered that some Roman aqueducts, especially those near volcanic zones, used a special version of concrete that included brick dust. Why? Because it helped resist mineral buildup from the flowing water. Think of it like early anti-limescale technology. Historians still argue whether this was discovered by accident or deliberate innovation. You climb the hill alongside the aqueduct, trailing the path of ancient water. The channel at the top is dry now, but the walls remain sound. In fact, some Roman aqueducts still carry water today. Not as museum pieces, but as functional infrastructure. At the top, you sit beside the trough and look out over the valley. The wind is soft here, a little cooler. You watch olive trees bend gently and remember that every one of these structures, the roads, the aqueducts, was designed with permanence in mind. Not perfection, not speed, but permanence. You think of a modern highway back home, how often the lanes crack, how quickly the bridges age. Built fast, replaced faster. Then you look down at the aqueduct, and you can't help but chuckle. This thing was built before your country existed, before your alphabet settled on its final 26 letters. And it's still standing, quiet, steady. Below you, a shepherd walks his flock. He nods as he passes, probably used to tourists snapping on ancient monuments. You wave back and trail your fingers along the channel's edge. The concrete here feels different, smoother, almost waxy. It's maybe because of the mineral water that once flowed through. Maybe because of the hands that once smoothed it. Another breeze, and with it, another thought. Maybe the Romans didn't think of concrete as just material, but as memory. This structure you're sitting on, it isn't just stone. It's a decision made 2,000 years ago, a solution to a problem, a collaboration between builders and nature. And it's still solving that problem today. You smile because suddenly, Roman concrete feels less like a building tool and more like a time machine. Not the flashy kind. No gears or glowing dials, but the kind you can sit on. Walk along. Drink from trust. You swing your legs over the side of the aqueduct and let your heels rest against the stone. The sun is dipping now, casting long shadows across the valley. You take a deep breath. Even the air feels older here. Historians still debate whether the true strength of Roman concrete was in its chemistry or its philosophy. Was it the minerals, the mix, the method? Or was it the mindset, this quiet insistence on building things well, even if no one would remember your name? The aqueduct doesn't care, doesn't brag. It just is. You hop down gently, the ground soft beneath your feet. The sheep have moved on. The shepherd is a speck in the distance, and behind you the aqueduct remains. Still holding, still whispering, still working. The stars are beginning to blink awake as you follow the curve of the aqueduct back toward the outskirts of a Roman settlement, one not marked on many modern maps, smaller than the ones tourists flock to, but no less impressive. And tonight, under the low hum of twilight, it feels like the kind of place where secrets stay quiet and concrete keeps its voice low. You walk into a courtyard lit by oil lamps, their flickering light throwing dancing shadows onto walls of exposed opus. Cumentitium, the Roman term for their concrete. It looks like stone, but it isn't. You can see it now. The mix, the fill, the fragments of pottery and brick that catch the firelight like tiny fossils. You touch the wall and smile, still warm from the day, still whole. Ahead is a small public bath, half ruined, half restored. You step inside. Quiet, no echo of footsteps, just the soft drip of condensation from the ancient pipes. The floors are mosaic, chipped in places, and the walls curve overhead like a protective shell. The ceiling, concrete, a dome no less. You blink. Because this isn't just some shed with a roof fits, a full-on vaulted ceiling, made over 1,800 years ago, without steel, without cranes. It's just scaffolding, muscle, and mathematical guts. Here is your mainstream historical fact. The Romans were the first civilization to widely use concrete to create large vaulted and domed spaces. Before them, most ceilings needed tons of columns. Roman engineers said, "What if we just poured the ceiling into a shape and let it hold itself up?" That leap changed architecture forever. And sitting beneath this dome, you feel it, the weight, the brilliance, the slight chill in the air that clings to mineral-rich surfaces. You lie back on a stone bench, letting your head rest against the cool curve, and imagine the builders staring up at their wooden framework, hoping the mix would harden before the scaffolding creaked. There is a story about the Pantheon-esque dome that engineers embedded lightweight, volcanic rock into the concrete to reduce stress on the walls. True or not, it captures their spirit. Use what you have, but use it wisely. Your quirky tidbit. Some Roman ceilings had pieces of pumice porous, floating rock mixed into the concrete. It made the dome lighter without sacrificing strength. You imagine someone tossing a rock into a bucket, watching it float, and thinking, "Yep, that'll do." Trial and error, with a side of intuition. You leave the bathhouse and wander into a public square where fountains trickle and benches line the perimeter. A pair of lovers sit beneath an arch carved with vines and birds. But beneath the decoration, concrete, again, always. You sit near the edge of a garden plot, enclosed by a low wall. You pick at the surface brick facing, yes, but the core is rubble and mortar. That's what the Romans called Corin veneer construction. The outside looked polished, the inside was pure function. Historians still argue whether this method was developed for speed or strength. Some say it was just cheaper to fake the look of marble. Others insist it added flexibility during earthquakes. The truth may be both, or neither. The Romans didn't always write down their reasoning, they just did. You tilt your head and hear music, a soft lyre, maybe a reed flute. Somewhere nearby, someone is practicing. You let the sound drift in one ear and out the other, like wind through olive leaves. Everything in this place whispers longevity. The benches, the steps, even the gutter stones. It's built not to impress, but to endure. You walk along the edge of a collapsed structure. Only a fragment remains. But what a fragment. A column base, half buried in grass, with concrete peeking from beneath the cracked marble shell. It's like seeing the skeleton under the sculpture. That's something people forget. Most Roman monuments weren't carved whole from marble. They were poured. The marble, just a costume. The strength was always in the mix underneath. You brush your fingers over a faint seam where facing meets core. It's nearly invisible now. It's by time. You smile again, because that fusion feels like a metaphor. Appearance and substance, working together. The stars above shimmer brighter now, and you step into the center of the square and look up at them. You wonder if you built a monument today, poured it with Roman concrete, who would be the one to touch it in 2,000 years? Would they feel the care you put into the mix? Would they whisper thanks? You walk toward the edge of the square where workers are repairing a wall. It's slow work, done by lamplight. One smooths the surface with a damp cloth. Another grinds volcanic ash in a mortar, humming softly. No rush, no noise, just rhythm. You ask how long it will last. One of them shrugs. Depends on the ash, he says. And how well we sleep tonight. You chuckle. Fair enough. The moon climbs higher as you step away, following the ancient paving stones that lead into another narrow lane. This one winds upward between shops and shuttered windows. You trail your fingers along the walls, feel the seams of construction, the roughness of aggregate, the smoothness of plastered overlays. Everything is layered. Everything has a core. And that's the story of Roman concrete, really. It doesn't shout, it doesn't gleam, but it stays, it holds, it survives. It's like memory, like stone. It's like the soft scrape of your sandals as you walk onward through the sleeping city. The lane bends one last time before opening into a quiet residential courtyard. Moonlight spills over tiled roofs and colonnades, painting long silver shadows across the flagstones. You step softly now, as if intruding, not on danger or secrets, but on something sacred. Stillness. This part of the city breathes differently, slower, as if the buildings themselves are asleep. You let your hand trail along a column as you pass. It's fluted, grand, and yes, hollow inside. Not carved from a single massive stone like some mythic obelisk, but poured. Roman concrete cast in place and wrapped in a marble veneer. And here's your mainstream fact. The Romans weren't shy about faking grandeur. What looked like solid stone was often just concrete wearing a disguise. Columns, statues, even entire facades were built from molds fast, efficient, but so well executed they fooled generations. It wasn't deceit, it was innovation. Think of it as ancient architectural cosplay. A wooden cart creaks in the distance. You glance toward the sound, but see no one. Just the cart tracks etched into the paving stones. They're deep, like grooves on an old record. Evidence of 1,000 daily journeys over a surface built to hold the weight of life. You pass a row of shops with shuttered windows, each one set into a frame of concrete walls disguised with stucco and paint. They mimic Greek aesthetics, frescoes, ionic swirls, colorful borders, but underneath, it's all Roman practicality. Beauty wrapped around backbone. One shop has a crumbling corner where the stucco has chipped away. You pause and peek inside. There it is again, the core and veneer construction. Rubble and mortar packed so tightly it looks almost geological. You wonder how many shoppers ever noticed or cared. You keep walking. A gentle slope leads you into a wealthier neighborhood. The villas here are larger, with gardens and fountains, and towering peristyles that open to the sky. One has an atrium, wide open, moonlight pooled on its mosaic floor like spilled milk. You can't help yourself. You step inside. The inner walls are smoother here, decorative, but again beneath the polished concrete. A type called opus reticulatum, small diamond-shaped stones, laid in a net-like pattern across a core of concrete. It's tidy, precise, like Roman Sudoku for walls. Quirky tidbit time, the Romans sometimes embedded seashells in their concrete walls, not for structure, but for decoration. Some villas near the coast had entire murals made from shells and colored glass pressed into wet concrete. Think of it as ancient beach house chic. You move further into the villa, following the gentle splash of a fountain. It's nestled in a small courtyard, shaded by cypress trees and flowering vines. The basin is simple, no fancy mosaics, no marble statues, but the form is perfect. The water falls from a stone spout into a pool lined with you. Guessed it, concrete. Still watertight, still cool. Still humming quietly with the science of forgotten minds. Historians still argue whether this kind of craftsmanship was universal across the empire, or if only elite regions enjoyed it. Some believe local builders adapted Roman methods to suit their climate and resources. Others think knowledge was more centralized, passed through guilds or military engineers. The evidence is there, but scattered. It's like the marble that once faced these walls, torn away by time, yet leaving the concrete core behind. You sit beside the fountain and let your fingers drift in the water. The bottom is smooth, rounded from centuries of ripples. Remember the ancient cistern you visited? The harbor? The aqueduct? Always this same quiet marvel, different forms? Same foundation. Concrete, concrete, concrete. Not glamorous, not loud, but utterly there. You look up at the domed ceiling of the atrium. There are no chandeliers, no beams, just the open curve of a poured surface, spanning a space wide enough for music to echo in. You wonder how they built it, how long it took, what mixture they used. One possibility: they started at the edges, using a wooden support frame, and poured layer after layer upward in concentric rings, each one allowed to harden before the next, like upside-down pottery. You can almost see it, the scaffolding creaking in the night, the mix being stirred in great shallow vats, the murmurs of calculation and prayer. You imagine the final moment when the frame was removed, when the dome held itself, and everyone exhaled. You smile, because this dome is still here, still holding in you. You're lying beneath it, head resting on your folded arms, listening to the faint dripping of water, the distant shuffle of a servant preparing for morning, the breeze slipping through a high window and stirring the scent of crushed herbs. This place isn't frozen in time, it's moving through time, carried forward by the strength of what holds it together. You press your hand flat against the floor. It's cool. It's textured, alive, concrete again. Always. You wake with your cheek against the stone floor of the villa's atrium. The concrete is cold now, having surrendered its daytime warmth to the open night. Crickets sing somewhere beyond the columns, and for a moment you're not sure what century you're in. But then the faint scent of olive oil and limestone pulls you back. You're still here, still surrounded by something that has refused to crumble for 2,000 years. You sit up slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the dark. The moon is slipping behind the roofline, and shadows are thickening around the garden edges. You feel like the last guest at a banquet held centuries ago, lingering just a little longer, listening for echoes. And maybe those echoes come from below. Yeah. You rise and cross the atrium, moving through a side corridor that leads to a set of steps narrow, steep and worn in the center from countless sandals. Down you go, into the underbelly of the villa, where the coolness becomes more than a temperature, it becomes a presence. You've entered the storage level. It's the cella, or underground chamber, where wine amphorae rests like sleeping statues, and the walls press close. But instead of feeling claustrophobic, it feels safe. The ceiling is vaulted again, arched, made of the same concrete, which you're beginning to trust more than most people. And here's your mainstream fact. Roman vaults, especially in substructures, were often made using opus cementitium, poured into wooden frameworks and left to harden into self-supporting curves. Some of the best preserved ones are still in use today, under colosseums, temples, and entire cities. You run your hand along the wall and feel a change in texture. This section has been coated with a waterproof layer, possibly opus signinum. The pinkish blend of crushed tiles and lime repels moisture, keeps the wine dry, keeps the memory preserved. A clay jug sits on a shelf, its surface flaking with age. You don't touch it yet. You just sit on the edge of a low step and imagine the people who once did. Their dinners, their stories, their laughter echoing in this chamber long before your own thoughts took residence here. Above you, the villa sleeps. But below, the foundation breathes, holds. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some Roman homes, there were Hippocausts' underground heating systems. Hot air would pass through concrete channels beneath the floor, warming rooms from below. Radiant heat in the 1st century. The system required precision in both design and material because poor concrete meant cracks, and cracks meant cold feet. And no Roman tolerated cold feet. You step deeper into the cellar and notice something else. Silence. But not the empty kind. The full kind. The kind where every surface is absorbing history. You can almost hear the weight of the stone, not in sound, but in atmosphere. A gentle draft draws your attention to a side chamber. You follow it, ducking through a short doorway, and find yourself in what may have once been a workshop. Tools lie rusting in shadow, chisels, a broken bucket, an old wooden mold for casting tiles. And then on the far wall you spot something odd, a faint inscription scratched into the concrete before it dried. A name, maybe, or a phrase. It's hard to read, but it's unmistakably human. Someone stood here centuries ago, wet mix on their hands, and decided to leave a mark. Not grand, not formal, just a passing thought pressed into eternity. Historians still argue whether these kinds of inscriptions were personal graffiti or records of laborers, builders, or slaves. Were they prideful, defiant, lonely, or just bored during a slow pour? You lean closer. The characters are uneven, rushed, but they're still here. While names carved into softer stone have long since faded, this scribble endures. Because concrete remembers. You sit for a while, back against the cool wall, and let the darkness settle around you like a cloak. This chamber isn't grand. There's no dome, no marble, no frescoes, just utility. Just form meeting function with quiet resolve. And maybe that's where the real genius lives. Not in the Pantheon, not in the triumphal arches, but in places like this, silent, underground, overlooked, places meant to work, not impress. You close your eyes and think about modern buildings, their glass facades, their concrete skeletons wrapped in gypsum and paint, their promise of progress. But how many of them will still be standing when the language they rebuilt in is no longer spoken? You stand slowly, stretch, and brush the dust from your clothes. Your fingers linger on the wall a moment longer. Then you climb the stairs, step by step, and return to the surface, where dawn is just beginning to think about arriving. The light is bluish now, cool, new, but the villa hasn't changed. The concrete beneath your feet is still there, still waiting, still holding. The light of morning begins its slow stretch across the Roman skyline, brushing the rooftops with soft gold. You step out of the villa, blinking as the sky shifts from deep indigo to pearly gray. The city is waking up, sparrows flutter between terracotta tiles, shutters creak open, and somewhere someone starts sweeping the street with a lazy rhythm. You follow that rhythm through quieter alleys, the soles of your sandals brushing dust from cobbled paths laid on a base of you. Guessed it, more Roman concrete. You realize that everywhere you've been, from harbor walls to bathhouse domes to cellar vaults, has been a variation on the same humble theme: ash, lime, water, and patience. Your path winds toward the edge of the city now, where ancient industry once thrived. You reach what remains of an old Roman warehouse, long roof gone, but the foundation walls still standing, solid and squat like stubborn memories. And now the scene changes. This part of your journey isn't about temples or baths. It's about how the Romans built all this. It's about the mixing yards, the labor, the logistics. You've seen the beauty now. You get to see the mess behind the magic. Here's your mainstream fact. Roman concrete wasn't delivered by truck or churned out by heavy machinery. It was mixed on site, by hand, in small batches. Builders added volcanic ash pozzolanin, different amounts depending on the structure's needs. Some formulas were waterproof. Some were fast-setting. Some were made to endure tidal waves. You'd find a small pit in the warehouse floor, rimmed by charred stone and clay residue, a mixing basin. You crouch beside it, brushing away centuries of wind-blown soil. It's nothing special at first glance, but in its day, it was the birthplace of endurance. Not far off, there's a crumbled wall showing an unfinished layer of concrete, its inner belly exposed. You step closer and see the chunks. Crushed brick, broken pottery, bits of stone. It's a mosaic of leftovers. What the modern world would call rubble. What the Romans called ingredients. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some construction sites, Romans deliberately reused broken statues, roof tiles, even old concrete as part of new mixes. It wasn't waste. It was structure. Recycling long before sustainability was a buzzword. The sun crests over the hills now, and light pours into the old yard. It reveals outlines, one-shadowed paths of carts. Impressions where barrels once sat, perhaps full of ash from Vesuvius or Stromboli, the very stuff that made their concrete magical. You walk through these ghost lines of labor, imagining the sight in full swing. Workers sweating under the sun, shouting orders, splashing water into dusty ash piles. The sour temps of lime in the air, the slap of wooden paddles against wet mortars. It was loud, hot, busy, but it worked. You stop near a drainage channel at the edge of the yard, still intact. The mix here is different, denser with finer grain. Built to resist both time and runoff. Even the small details, the stuff most people never see, were constructed with care. Historians still argue whether the widespread success of Roman concrete was due to the material alone or to the organization behind it. Some believe Rome's greatest invention wasn't just the mix, it was the manual, standardized system of how to use it. Others think it was cultural, a mindset that valued longevity over aesthetics. Maybe it was both, or maybe it was simpler still. Maybe they just hated rebuilding things. You chuckle at that thought as you follow a narrow path leading away from the warehouse. The road turns rocky, then grassy, then opens into an overlook. Below lies the city, yawning into the morning light. You see domes, bridges, aqueducts, walls all quiet, all still doing their job. You sit on a low stone bench, rough with age, and realize it, too, was probably poured into place. Not carved, not imported, just mixed, framed, and left to become stone. That's the genius of Roman concrete. It didn't mimic permanence. It became it. You lean back and take in the view. You've seen the marvels. You've touched the formulas. You've followed the roads. And still, it all comes back to this simple truth. The Romans didn't need concrete to be perfect. They needed it to last. They didn't chase beauty for its own sake. They made strength beautiful. And now, 2,000 years later, their quiet gray legacy still cradles the feet of strangers like you. It hums beneath your seat, murmurs in the aqueduct, hides behind chipped paint. It never demands applause, but it gets it anyway. Because while empires fall and languages die, this concrete remains, holding, waiting, smiling maybe. The path away from the overlook winds gently downward. leading you back into the veins of the Roman world. But something shifted, not in the stones beneath your feet, but in how you see them. Before, they were just walls, floors, foundations. Now, you understand they're the quiet bones of an ancient system, still intact, still working. And at the core of every curve, corner, and corridor lies the same unsung hero concrete. You pass through a city gate flanked by towers. Their upper battlements have crumbled, but the base, still square, still solid, still Roman. And again, it's not carved blocks that impress you, it's the filler between them. Mortar that's fused into something harder than stone itself. You pause, press your hand against the wall, and feel its warmth. Not just from the morning sun, but from the years. You walk onward, and soon you're standing beneath a triumphal arch. Not one of the famous ones etched into postcards and history books, but a smaller cousin. Less grand, more practical. It marks the crossing of a road perhaps where a Roman general once passed, or maybe just where a lot of carts bottlenecked. Here's your historical fact. Roman arches were marvels of engineering because of their use of voussoirs, wedge-shaped stones and keystones, all held in place by gravity and friction. But in many Roman arches, the internal filling wasn't stoned, it was concrete. This combination of weight-bearing elegance and moldable strength allowed arches to rise faster, cheaper, and with fewer breaks under pressure. You step beneath the arch and look up. The keystone still sits at the center like a clenched fist holding everything together. You try to imagine the scaffolding they used to pour the form behind it, the way they balanced wet mix against wood and time. Beneath your feet is a low tunnel. You follow it, ducking slightly. Inside, the smell shifts cooler, earthier, damp. The wall surface becomes coarser here, less refined. Still concrete, but not for show. And now it gets more intimate. You're entering a Kalina Roman kitchen, or rather, the remains of one in what must have been a small apartment complex. You see the base of a hearth, the indentation where a basin once sat. The floor is thick, rough, pockmarked. It's not decorative. It's defensive against heat, ash, grease. This, too, is concrete, but a specific kind. One mixed to endure not just time but daily life. Here's your quirky tidbit. Roman kitchen floors sometimes used a particular blend of crushed tile and lime called opus signinum, both water-resistant and easier to clean. Some even added bits of crushed glass or marble to reflect light from oil lamps in the evenings. Ancient interior design meets function. You sit on a half-broken ledge trying to imagine the clatter of pots, the smell of charred bread, the arguments over spice. Maybe someone dropped a pan here. Maybe someone whispered secrets over stew. The walls have forgotten the words, but the material has remembered the shape. Historians still argue whether the widespread domestic use of concrete was unique to Rome or borrowed from earlier Mediterranean cultures. Some suggest the Etruscans had primitive versions. Others claim the Egyptians used similar lime mortar. But the Romans took it further into kitchens, alleys, markets, and multi-story apartment blocks called insulae. You step outside and look up at one such building. Only a partial reconstruction now. But you can see the method. Stacked levels, current veneer construction, wooden beams embedded between floors, all anchored by concrete. Imagine that a third-floor apartment, held up by a foundation poured before your great-grandmother, grandmother, ever learned to walk. You squint at a crack running down one section of the wall. It's small, filled with something white and crusty. You lean closer. It's not a flaw, it's healing, that's right. Some Roman concrete appears to self-heal over time. When water enters a crack, it reacts with the remaining lime inside, triggering crystallization. The result? A patch. Not perfect, but enough. And suddenly, that feels profound. The idea that something built to hold can repair itself. You sit again, back against a column, and close your eyes. The sun is higher now, warming your face. Birds chirp from rooftops. The city buzzes gently with the quiet industry of waking life. And everywhere, beneath boots and hooves and wagons and sandals, beneath prayer and poetry and politics, beneath dinner tables and aqueducts and theaters and tombs, is this material. Roman concrete, still holding, still hardening, still whispering. And for now, you're content to simply listen. As the city stirs to life around you, you stand once more and begin walking with no real direction, just following where the concrete leads. That's the funny thing about it. You've stopped looking for the spectacular. Now you're noticing the quiet constancy of walls, paths, and platforms. Not the things people built so they wouldn't have to think about them again. That's what Roman concrete offered. Peace of mind by the ton. You follow a series of stepped streets that rise toward one of the city's older forums. It's quieter here, less visited, but the layout remains familiar. Open square, surrounded by columns, with remnants of temples and civic buildings arranged like worn teeth around a mouth that once never stopped talking. You walk past a podium where a speaker might have once stood, his voice long gone, but the structure holding strong. Beneath the marble facing, more concrete. Of course, you grin to yourself. You're not surprised anymore. Here's your mainstream fact. Roman forums were built as administrative, political, and commercial centers, and nearly all of them made liberal use of concrete in their foundations and support structures. The open plazas were usually paved in stone, but the podiums, rostra, and back buildings often had concrete cores. You sit on a fallen column drum and take in the scene. It's not grand like the Forum Romanum, but that's what makes it lovely. It's sleepy, comfortable, familiar in its decay. And yet not really decayed, just softened by time. A nearby wall shows the distinctive opus incertum, style randomly placed stones in concrete, like someone pressed handfuls of rock into a wet cake. It's not pretty, but it works. It has held together for centuries. You run your hand along it, feeling the bumps and ridges. It's oddly satisfying, like tracing the bark of an old tree. Then you spot something tucked in the corner of the forum, a staircase, half buried in dust and weeds, leading downward, always downward, with the Romans. They built up, yes, but they also burrowed deep. You descend into a substructure cool again, the temperature dropping as your feet find each step. This was once a storeroom or treasury, maybe even a jail. The walls are thick, almost absurdly so, and vaulted in a way that only Roman engineering could manage without modern tools. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some Roman substructures, builders intentionally left gaps in the concrete walls to allow bats or owls to nest. Taste, control, and storage areas. Who needs pesticides when nature's night patrol can take care of your grain? The floor is packed earth, but the ceiling, still perfectly curved? You lay a hand on it and imagine the wooden mold that held it in place as the mix hardened. There's something wonderful about the trust that required. The builders didn't know the dome would hold. They believed it would. Historians still argue whether Roman builders fully understood the chemistry of their concrete or simply learned through iteration and experience. Was their brilliance scientific or intuitive? A few surviving texts hint at theory, but mostly they just got it done. You climb back to the surface, back into the light, and follow the path out of the forum. Your steps lead you to a bridge-short squat with low rails and arched supports. No tourist groups here. It's just you and the pigeons. You crouch near one of the arches, tracing the stone face with your fingers. You're not surprised when your knuckles knock against something softer underneath. That sound again? Roman concrete, humming quietly beneath the marble smile. Some of these bridges still support traffic today, not just foot traffic, actual cars and buses. Concrete that held legionnaires now holding commuters. You walk across the bridge, each footfall echoing lightly. The river below moves slowly, reflecting the sky. You think about all the water that's passed beneath this arch. It's all the weight it's borne. You pause at the center and look back at the city. From this angle, you can see the layers temples beside apartments, domes rising behind alleyways, aqueducts crossing rooftops like veins, and beneath it all, concrete, still gripping, still growing stronger with time. You remember what they say about Roman concrete getting better as it ages? That its mineral structures continue to crystallize? That cracks seal themselves? The mixture doesn't just resist decay, it evolves? And maybe that's the secret. Not permanence, but adaptability. You take a deep breath. The breeze smells like dust and citrus. Somewhere, someone is baking bread. You keep walking. Another arch, another street, another wall that's not just standing, but thriving. And all you can do is marvel, not at the grandeur, but at the grit. At the way this humble gray mix, ignored by most, has quietly outlived empires. You've seen so much now: docks and domes, aqueducts and kitchens. The grand arches of forgotten forums and the hidden vaults of wine-stained storage rooms. But as the afternoon shadows stretch longer, you find yourself drawn somewhere quieter, at not the monumental, but the personal. Because Roman concrete didn't just shape empires, it shaped homes, hearts, and human habits. You follow a worn footpath out of the city, past grazing sheep and low stone walls. The hum of civilization fades behind you. Up ahead, nestled in olive groves and dappled sunlight, stands a modest farmhouse, Roman rural architecture at its sleepest. Its roof has caved in. Its fields are long abandoned. But the structure, still there. The foundation holds. The cistern remains watertight. And the walls, though chipped and battered, haven't crumbled. Because even out here in the countryside, the Romans mixed their concrete like it mattered. Here's your mainstream fact. Roman concrete was reserved for fancy temples and public baths. It was used in rural infrastructure too: barns, mills, granaries. Even humble farmhouses like this one had cisterns and flooring poured from durable concrete blends designed to endure the elements. You step through what was once the doorway, now just a frame of stone. Inside, the floors are rough and uneven, but unmistakably poured perhaps, with some opus signatum, that blend of crushed tiles and lime that offered waterproofing and insulation. You scuff your foot gently, stirring up dust and maybe a few centuries. A low bench hugs one wall, and you ease onto it. Through the gaps in the roof, golden light spills across the floor. The air smells of old earth, time, and sun-warmed stone. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the past as it must have been. The creak of tools, the clink of amphory, a child's laughter trailing out into the orchard. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some Roman farms, builders embedded coins, bones, or bits of pottery into the concrete floors, sometimes as a form of protection, sometimes purely for superstition. Imagine stepping on a lucky charm every day just to reach the grain bins. You reach down and tap a small stone embedded in the floor. It wobbles but stays put, solid, like everything else. Historians still argue whether Roman rural architecture was standardized by manuals, sent out from central cities, or developed more organically from local needs. Some argue for tight imperial control, others for grassroots genius. What's clear, though, is that even the most remote builders knew how to make something last. You wander through the rest of the house to rooms at most. One has a partial wall still standing, with layers of lime plaster peeling like pages from an ancient book. Beneath that plaster, yes, concrete. You grin. Of course. In the corner, a circular depression in the floor might have once held a pressor, maybe a fire pit. The answers are gone now. Time has erased the labels, but not the structure. That's the difference, you think. Structures stay, names don't. And that's why concrete feels more honest than any monument. It doesn't care for glory. It's the stuff that stays behind to quietly hold everything else up. You step back outside into the olive grove, leaves shimmering in the warm breeze. Small well sits nearby, its rim worn smooth by countless hands. You peek inside and see the lining. Ringed, scored solid. More concrete. More proof. Even in the act of drawing water, the Romans trusted their material. You sit beside the well, letting the silence of the countryside lull your thoughts. No city noise. No horses. No politics. Just sun, stone, and the faint buzz of insects drifting over dry fields. You realize something beautiful. The Romans didn't just build to impress gods or emperors. They built to make daily life work. And that's where their genius whispers loudest. Not in the oaths of marble, but in the sigh of concrete beneath tired feet. A gust of wind rattles the olive trees. You rise, brushing dust from your legs, and begin the walk back toward town. The road is little more than a dirt track now, but you see pieces of something half buried along the edge-broken tiles. Worn stones and chunks of Roman concrete, like breadcrumbs leading you home. You follow them, step by step, until the path straightens and the city begins to rise again in the distance. Domes catching sunlight, columns casting long shadows. Walls that don't whisper, they hum. And as you walk, you realize that you've stopped marveling at how Roman concrete has survived. Now, you just quietly accept it, because of course it has. Of course it's still here. That's what it was made to do. You re-enter the city just as the shadows begin to stretch into the warm amber of evening. It's quieter now, less clatter, more hush. And you pass the same walls, the same roads, the same quiet arches, but now they feel like old friends. You nod at them as you pass, as if to say, I see you now, and they nod back. You move through a small square where a fountain gurgles softly in its basin. You remember the one in the villa, its quiet voice echoing across the marble? This one is plainer, chipped, half covered in moss, but the basin is whole. No leaks. Concrete again, doing its job without complaint. You sit beside it for a while and watch the water tumble over the edge, then disappear into the same pool it circled for centuries, like a lazy thought in a looping dream. That's what this whole day has been, a loop through history. Not the battles, not the emperors, not the scandals, but the bones, the pulse, the stuff the empire was built on literally. Here's your final mainstream fact. Modern scientists only recently began to unlock the precise secrets of Roman concrete's longevity. Studies show that the volcanic ash used in Roman mixes interacts with seawater over time to form rare crystalline structures, like altobermarite, that strengthen the concrete rather than eroding it, meaning some of Rome's marine structures have not only survived, but improved with age. You stare down at the fountain, now with fresh eyes. Maybe it's stronger now than the day it was poured. And for your final quirky tidbit, Roman builders sometimes scratched little smiley faces or stick figures into the wet concrete, hidden behind bricks or beneath floors. Not for art, not for history, just because they could, because they were people, not legends. And they liked to leave jokes for the future. You laugh quietly, thinking of some grinning stonecutter 2,000 years ago, leaving behind a doodle in the corner of a wall, just waiting to be discovered by a curious archaeologist or a lucky wanderer like you. Historians still argue whether Rome's fall was really a fall or just a slow exhale, a graceful bow out. The buildings stayed, the roads held, the concrete endured. Maybe that's what matters most. You rise from the fountain and begin one last walk through the sleeping city. There's that column again, wearing its marble like a cape over a concrete skeleton. There's that courtyard floor, slightly sunken now, but still refusing to crack. There's that archway blackened by time, but holding its perfect curve in quiet defiance. You walk past them all, and with each step, you feel a little more held, a little more rooted. As if the past is not gone, but waiting just beneath the surface in layers of stone, in the texture of a wall, in a silence that isn't empty, but full of patient memory. You reach the final overlook, the one where the harbor spread out below you in that misty, dreamlike way earlier. The water glows silver now. The sea is calm. The docks are dark. And still the breakwaters, the piers, the underwater platforms are there, strong as ever, stronger even. Because that's what Roman concrete does. It doesn't just survive the centuries. It adapts to them. You breathe in the sea air, cool and salted. You can almost taste the history in it. For one last moment, you let yourself imagine not. A city that crumbled, but a city that sank gently into its own story. One structure at a time, until all that remained was this. The parts that refused to disappear, the quiet parts, the strong parts. The ones made not of pride or gold, but ash, lime, water, and time. And you were lucky enough to walk among them. So now, as the wind settles and the sky deepens into that velvety blue between dusk and dream, all that's left to do is rest. The story has been told, the concrete has held, and sleep is gently calling. Word count: 1093. Wind down, so now we leave the city behind. Let the dust settle on those ancient roads. Let the fountains whisper to themselves, and let the shadows lengthen softly across forgotten floors. Close your eyes and feel the weight of time lifting not, pressing down on you, wrapping gently around your shoulders like a blanket warmed by memory. There's no need to hold on to every fact, every name, every stone. What matters is the feeling, that quiet knowing that strength can be silent, and that permanence is often born not from glory, but from patience. The Roman world still lingers, not in shouts or triumphs, but in the quiet curve of a vaulted ceiling, in the firmness of a step beneath your feet, in the calm that comes from things built to last. So breathe in, long and deep. Let the rhythm of the past match the rhythm of your breath. The story is over, but its echo remains soft, steady, and unbreakable. Let your thoughts drift now like dust through a sunbeam. Let your muscles soften, your eyes grow heavier. You're safe here, held by walls that have outlived kings, surrounded by silence that has endured armies, cradled by a city that still remembers. And as sleep pulls you gently down slowly, kindly know that tonight you rest where empires once stood, and nothing, not even time, can take that away. Sweet dreams, and before you drift all the way into sleep, just a quiet thank you from me to you for sharing this moment, for letting your mind wander through the soft folds of ancient history. If this story helped you relax, unwind, or simply forget the day for a little while, I'd be so grateful if you hit that subscribe button, not out of habit only, if it truly brought you peace. Wishing you the gentlest dreams. And I'll see you again soon, right here. Good night.